Welcome. Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Bible Story Children's Time. This is the first one of the week because yesterday we had quite a mess going on outside, didn't we? I hope you are all safe and that there was not too much damage done to your home. But it was scary, wasn't it? And that reminded me of a Bible story or a particular story from the Gospels that is told actually in all three of the Synoptic Gospels. So it's one of those unusual events that is recorded by all three Gospel writers. And it's a very important one. And the way it happened is this, and some of this might sound very familiar to you after yesterday. Jesus had just begun, I'm working off from Luke chapter 8, verses 22 to 25. The other stories are basically the same, but we've been going through Luke, so I figured we'd stick with him. Jesus had started his ministry, and he has been, if you remember, he preached at his home synagogue in Nazareth and got run out of town. But after that, he's been going around to all the other towns and villages in the area, and he's been very successful in his preaching. Not only is he able to draw crowds of people and preach to them and get the good news that he is trying to bring to people, he's able to get that across to them, at least just to some extent. He's also able to heal a lot of people. He's healing crippled people. He is casting demons out of people who are unwell in other ways. And he's just having a great deal of success at that early point in his ministry. And it's taken a toll on him. Because basically he can't rest anywhere, because there's always somebody who wants something from him. He's kind of like the ultimate, international celebrity all of a sudden. Not international in this case, but he's being treated like some big star today, the kind of person who can't walk outside of their house without having the paparazzi jumping at him and taking pictures and things like that. So Jesus is undergoing, at the same time he's doing his ministry, he's undergoing this tremendous pressure from those around him. And although it doesn't say so, we might even guess that some of it comes from his disciples, because his disciples are seeing these great things that he's doing, and they're encouraging, of course, saying, "Wow, Jesus, you're doing some great stuff. You got to keep doing this. You got to keep reaching out. You got to keep preaching to people, and you got to keep doing this, and you got to keep doing that." By this time, Jesus had his disciples picked, his 12 closest students. So, at the point where this passage picks up, Jesus has been engaged in ministry for a while now, and he's finding it super stressful. So he finally says to his disciples, "You know what, guys? Get me a boat. Get me a boat, pick me up, and we're just going to go across the sea for a little bit, the Sea of Galilee." Now, Sea of Galilee, that's one of the terms it's known by. It's also called the Lake of Tiberias, and I think there's one or two others in there. Gennesaret is another one. It's called an inland sea, but by our standards, it's really a big lake. It's about 12 miles long, and at its widest point, it's 8 miles. So it's a pretty good distance. And where it is geographically, sometimes big storms come up, and they come up pretty suddenly. And the disciples knew this. The ones who were fishermen knew that. So while they were out in the middle of the sea, the middle of the lake, crossing toward the other side, all of a sudden, the wind started to come up. And it started to get dark. And it got darker and darker and darker. And if you were anywhere yesterday at, around 4 o'clock, 25 hours ago, and you were able to look outside, you can understand what the disciples were seeing. It's super dark. And the wind is starting to pick up. And the waves are starting to pick up. And as the waves roll and the ship rolls from side to side, and it starts to get more and more and more, all of a sudden the lightning starts. And they find themselves in the middle of a storm. So the storm is happening. They're out in the middle of the lake. They're, an hour away from either side. And it's pouring rain. The wind is howling. It's lightning. Every time the lightning flashes, they're afraid it's going to strike the mast of the boat, which would probably cause a fire. And the disciples are starting to freak out. And it's hard to know which ones are freaking out more. The ones who are not sailors and have no idea how to do what to do about this storm, or the ones who are sailors and have a good idea of what could happen to them. Because, they've fished more than one of their buddies out of the lake after a storm. And as things start to look really bad, the water is starting to pour into the boat every time the waves break over it. And it's starting to sink lower and lower into the water, even as the waves toss it about. The disciples remembered, Jesus, He works miracles. He heals people. He does all of these super special things. We've got to talk to Him. And they look around, and Jesus isn't sitting with them. And they start to feel their way toward the back of the boat. They're at the front. They start to feel their way toward the back of the boat. And it's still tossing and everything's going bad here. And they get to the back, and there's this shelf on the back of the boat at what they call the stern, if you're a nautical type. There's the shelf at the stern of the boat. And Jesus is laying on that shelf, curled up on a cushion, peacefully sleeping, while the world seems to be getting ripped apart around him. And for a moment, the disciples just stare at this like, how can he be sleeping through this? And then they start to yell, hey, Jesus, wake up, Jesus. We're all going to die. Why aren't you, awake? Why aren't you doing something? And Jesus just wakes up, kind of looks around, he feels the waves, sees the lightning, feels the rain getting blasted into his face. And he looks at his disciples and says, dudes, don't you have any faith? I'm here. And then Luke tells us Jesus rebuked the wind and the waves. Basically, he said to the storm, hey, knock it off. And we're told the waves suddenly calmed. The wind got calm. The rain stopped. The boat stopped stopped rocking from side to side. And all of a sudden they were floating across a perfectly calm sea. Now you would think the disciples would be relieved. Because after all, they were all about to die, as far as they knew. But after Jesus calmed the storm, after Jesus showed that he was in charge of even something as uncontrollable as the weather, his disciples were a little bit freaked out about that too. And they said to one another, who is this guy? I mean, we thought we knew him, but he commands the winds and the water and they obey him. And that's when they started to get an even better understanding of who Jesus was. That he was indeed someone divine. The other thing that happens in this story, as I said, is Jesus, he rebukes the wind and the waves, but he also sort of rebukes his disciples when he says, where is your faith? Basically, he's saying, guys, yeah, weather's awful. But come on, you're with me, right? So what do you have to worry about? And I think that's the part that we really ought to take away from this story. That's the lesson. Looking out at that storm yesterday, as black as it was, the sirens going off and everything else, that was scary. It was really scary. But yet, if you know that Jesus Christ is with you, there's a part of you that can just sort of calmly and quietly say, Jesus is with me. I'm not sure what's going to happen. But as long as Jesus is with me, I know I'm going to be okay. And I am okay with whatever happens. That's a tough lesson to learn. And it's a tough place to get to. I think that's one of the things that we can learn from this story about Jesus and the storm and the disciples. No matter what storms we have going on in our lives, whether they're real, physical, meteorological storms like we had yesterday, or whether it's COVID-19 or some other illness or any of 1,000,001 other things that can be happening in our lives, we know we still have Jesus that we can turn to and just say, help me. Give me strength. Give me comfort. Help me during this difficult time. And if we have the faith to do that, Jesus will help us. Not to say everything's always going to turn out the way we want it, but it is going to Jesus is going to continue to be with us no matter what. And we can have faith in that. So, that's it for today's Bible Story Children's Time. We will be back tomorrow with another story from the Gospel of Luke, of another event, something unusual that happened in Jesus' life. But until then, take care, stay safe, be healthy.